Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. My name is Zamanullah Sand. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project to support teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. It is an initiative using the rise in online professional development to connect people from around the world with opportunities which they may not have had due to the old normal of face-to-face conferences. And for this webinar, now it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce William Littlewood. Professor William Bill Littlewood is a professor emeritus at the Language Center, Hong Kong Baptist University, teaching on MA courses in language studies. He has worked in secondary schools and teacher education in the UK, where he was also a member of several professional committees of modern language teaching and was elected president of the British Association for Language Teaching. He was also involved in a Council of Europe projects. His publications include Communicative Language Teaching and Foreign and Second Language Learning, both with Cambridge University Press, which have been used widely in teacher education and translated into several languages. What a pleasure and privilege it is to have you, Bill. Thank you for your time. Thanks very much. We appreciate your presence there. Can you hear me, Professor? You are muted.
No, you have to click accept. Check, that's okay.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Ask if they can see it. Ask if they can see it.
Yeah. Can you see it? Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see it.
Can you see my screen now?
Perfect.
Oops.
Yes, I do.
So
I do.
You can start.
Okay. Good. So I think I can start. Can I?
Sure, you can. Good to go.
Good. Okay. Good. So, today I'm going to talk about motivation. Now, motivation is one of the things that affect the success in language learning. We all know that. Now, what are the things that affect success in language learning? Well, in various studies, etc., 3 things have been found to be most influential in influencing success. One is motivation, one is aptitude, the ability to learn, and another one is emotional factors such as anxiety and satisfaction, anxiety in a negative way, satisfaction in a positive way, etc. These have all been found to affect second language learning. And there's what we call a virtual circle. A virtual circle that these factors influence each other. They're all interconnected. So when we have less anxiety, then we have more motivation. And if we have more happiness, we also have more motivation. But then, of course, if we have more motivation, then we have more success. And if we have more success, then we have more motivation. Therefore, more success again. And so the whole thing it goes around in a circle, a virtual circle, if you like, not a vicious circle. So less motivation can lead to less success and then less motivation, but a virtuous circle that one thing leads to another if we have more of it. And so a key question for us language teachers is, with our learners, how can we best strengthen this virtuous circle? First of all, in their classroom learning. That's what I'll talk mostly about today. And the second in their learning outside class, because that is also an important aspect. But today I'm going to talk mainly about classroom learning there. Now, okay, what is motivation and where does it come from? There are many ways of analyzing the sources of motivation, what creates motivation. But here's one. I've analyzed it into 5 different sources of motivation. First of all, many people learn a language for practical motives. For example, I'll look at these in more detail in a moment. Others look at it from social motives, intrinsic motives. I'm going to look at these in more detail in a moment. Self-fulfillment motives and transcendent motives. So now I've just outlined the areas, the 5 areas. Let me look at them in a little bit more detail. Practical motives for why people learn a language. Instrumental motivation, for example, the learner learns in order to pass an exam, get a job, etc. These are simply terms that are often used. Instrumental, people do it in order to get a job, pass an exam, they get something from it, maybe they get promotion, it's instrumental. Similar practical motive, but more bound up to the immediate situation where the learner is learning, so actually inside the classroom often. It's extrinsic motivation. The learner is learning for external reasons, for example, to obtain an external reward, to avoid a punishment. So quite often in the class, you see students learning because the teacher is giving out sweets or points whenever they give a right answer. That is an external reward, and that would be called an extrinsic motivation. Or they learn in order to avoid a punishment. So because if they don't learn properly, they might be made to stay in outside class or they might have to carry out their work again, copy out their work again, and so on. So those are practical motives that people have. But instrumental and extrinsic motives, these external motives, practical motives, they can be very powerful. We all know that. Many of us have learned a language very much in order to pass an exam or in order to get an exam, to get a job, but they depend on external factors. And so, and these external factors might weaken. So once we pass the exam or once we get the reward, then the external source of motivation has gone. So when the goal or the reward is achieved, very often the external factors weaken and the motivation weakens as well, which we don't want, of course. We want people to learn more. So they are best supported by other motives, because it's not only one kind of motive, but many kinds of motives can work together. So they're best supported by other kinds of motives. So here are some of them. Intrinsic motives. For example, intrinsic motivation, when the learner finds enjoyment and stimulation in the actual process of learning. They love the actual process of learning, like many people do. Quite often when you go into a class, you see the children or the students actually focusing on their work, enjoying being in that situation and enjoying learning. That would be intrinsic motivation. Or knowledge motivation is also intrinsic. The learner is motivated because he or she feels that they are developing new knowledge or skills. So these are things which go beyond just a practical benefit. They are intrinsic to the learning itself. Of course, they may exist as well. So people may enjoy developing new knowledge or skills, but it may also have a practical reason for them to get a new job or to pass an exam. So we're not saying that it's got to be one kind of motive or the other. In fact, ideally, different kinds of motives exist together and they strengthen each other. Okay, so we've got these intrinsic motives as well, but then we've got also other sources of motivation, social motives, learning a language for social reasons. For example, The learner learns in order to take part in another community. They want to go abroad, they want to go to Germany, they want to go to America, they want to go to China. So they're learning to be able to be part of another community, and that is usually called integrative motivation. It's not that they want to integrate totally into the other community, but they want to become part of it in some way, to be able to communicate with other people and take part in the life in another community. So that is a social motive. Another kind of social motive, which is sometimes ignored, is that quite often people don't have a very clear conception of the other community in any case, but they're learning in order to take part in international communication in a broader sense. So they have an international orientation. They want to communicate with people outside their own nation, outside their own culture. And that is especially important these days when you get a lot of students who are learning so-called English as a lingua franca. They're learning English not because it's connected with England or America, but because it's a language which is used by many other countries over the world. And it's used as a way of communicating with people from all over the world. And so so if people have an international orientation, then that again will be a strong motivation for them to learn language, whatever language it may be. So it could be English as a lingua franca, could also be any other language which is used for communicating outside. Okay, so there's a third source of motives. Like I must always keep reminding you that they may exist together. So you can have an international orientation, but you can also have a knowledge orientation as well, together. Then other kinds of motivation, which again might exist at the same time, I call them self-fulfillment motives. Motives which are connected with the person's self, how they see themselves, how they feel themselves to be. So that learning a language might be meaningful to somebody because he or she feels that they're developing in meaningful ways. They're getting a broader view of the world. They're becoming a more complete person. Their personality is developing many more aspects to it. They can communicate in new ways. They can think in new ways. It all contributes to self-fulfillment as an individual, which is a very strong motivation in many people. And again, it's not dependent on the specific situation. It's not dependent, say, for example, on a practical motive, which might go away if the practical reason goes away, but it's there inside the person. It's intrinsic to what they're doing. So these are also intrinsic, you could call them, but they're just different sorts of intrinsic motivation. So quite often nowadays, the second bullet point here, people talk about future self conceptions. This comes from psychology, that many people see that the idea is that people have inside them a conception of the ideal self, who they would like to be. Now, this ideal self can have aspects of social interaction, aspects of what they can do practically. So the ideal self could be somebody who can communicate easily with other people, could be somebody who can do all kinds of things with the language, all kinds of jobs, etc. So they have a vision of a future self who can use the second language, and that again sits inside them, that vision, and acts as a kind of permanent, well, semi-permanent for a long time anyway. It's a sort of, reason for them to learn the second language, to acquire it. Okay, so there's self-fulfillment motives that can play a role as well. Now we have a fifth area that I'm looking at now, is one which is sometimes neglected when we talk about it nowadays. And I call it transcendent motives, because quite often we're motivated by things which are not connected with the present situation, not connected with our own self. They're not connected with practical reasons or with practical enjoyment, or even with developing our own self for the future, but they're sort of connected with the transcendent areas, things which are beyond the here and now, things which, motivations which take us beyond the here and now. For example, in imagination, our imagination can take us into areas where we want to find language. Through music, music gets us to transcend the current situation, and if language can be connected to it, again, that's a powerful motivation. Through poetry and other literature, all of these things take us beyond the here and now, and these are things which can motivate learning the language in very powerful ways. So to give you an example of this is when I asked some students, these were MA students who had learned English for quite a long time. When I asked them to give metaphors for what is second language learning like to you, here are some of the ones they said, and they all, in different ways, to me anyway, they seem to express that learning a second language had a kind of transcendent meaning, not just practical or anything like that, not just to do with developing their own self, but to do with things which are beyond the here and now. So here are two of them, and you can read more in that little article there, which will be available online soon. There's a reference at the end, not yet online, but soon. For example, learning a second language is like reading a magic story, because you always stay curious to know what will happen next. I think if you sit inside that those words, you can sort of picture how it is that learning a second language can be an exciting thing, where you want to know more and more. Likewise, another one says similar things. Learning a second language is like discovering an unknown path, because it will lead you to a brand new world that you've never met before. That is true. Obviously, if learning a second language, you don't know what's going to come next. And that kind of transcendent motive can carry us through more and more interesting aspects of learning and motivate us to learn more. And here's a similar kind of view, but this time expressed in poetry, but in Tagore, the Indian poet. And this could be sort of expressing the kind of a kind of strong, very strong version of this transcendent motive. Deep is my desire in country after country to identify myself with all men. So you want to connect yourself with all men. To be born, I'll just give you two examples from the poem. There are others there which you can read for yourself. To be born an Arab child in the desert, to toil with dedication as the ancient Chinese land. This last bit to me is the strongest one. To experience existence in all homes. So that kind of transcendent motivation, the second language can take us into all these unknown areas, all these areas of the imagination. So those are then I've looked then at three particular sources of motivation: the practical motives, instrumental and extrinsic motives, social motives, communicating with other people, intrinsic motives, enjoying the language, enjoying the goals of learning, self-fulfillment motives, striving to attain a future self, which you think has got qualities that you want, transcendent motives, going beyond the here and now. And so all of those different motivations can appeal to different learners, and through the way that we present the language and through the activities that we create, we can appeal to those different motives, obviously, and talk to the students, and through the activities, they're there. Okay, so if we now move ahead to motivation in the classroom. What about motivation? Because what we've just been looking at are motivations which are mostly already inside people. We can strengthen them and develop them, but mostly they are inside people before they come, and more as they learn, we hope. But of course, in the classroom, we're hoping to develop motivation through various ways of doing it. So in the next little bit, I'm going to give three perspectives on motivation in the classroom, where we as teachers can have a big effect. And I'm going to look, first of all, I'm going to look at a theory called self-determination theory. And self-determination theory, so you can see there that there's a website on self-determination. So if you want to look up more about that, there's a lot of it on this website, not related specifically to second language learning, but to the whole theory of self-determination, which is influential in many, many areas of education. Okay, so self-determination theory is based upon two kinds of motivation that we've just mentioned, in fact, extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation, when a learner learns in order to obtain a reward or avoid a punishment. Intrinsic motivation, when the learner gets some kind of enjoyment and satisfaction from the actual process of learning. So those are the two basic concepts of self-determination theory. So what's that got to do with teaching? Well, according to this theory, they're not just complete opposites, but there's a continuum of different motivations, which from the most extrinsic to the most intrinsic motivation. And we as teachers can help students move from being extrinsically motivated to the most intrinsically motivated state. So we can help movers to learn along this continuum, so they become increasingly self-determined in their learning. Self-determined or self-regulated. Both terms are used and they mean the same. So, and learning is said, this is based a lot on sort of controlled, detailed experiments as well as theory as well. That when students feel that they are self-determined or are self-determined, then not only do they learn better because they control their own learning, but also they feel happier as people. They have better mental health because they feel more in control of their destiny. So how can we encourage this self-determination? Well, again, according to the theory, based upon studies, but the theory is there, plus the studies, so evidence as well, the self-determination, the feeling of it, is increased when we can increase a student's feelings of autonomy, so the sense that they have more control over what goes on in class, when we can increase their feelings of competence, have more a sense that they can do everything, that they are able, that they are competent to do everything that's asked of them, and relatedness, when they feel related to the other people around them. So autonomy, competence, and relatedness, those are believed within this theory to be three of the basic conditions for having self-determined learners. Now, and if we can increase these three things, give the students more autonomy really independence, a feeling that they are in control of themselves, that they are independent and not controlled by others. Competence, if we can increase this feeling of autonomy, competence, the feeling that they can do everything, and relatedness, the feeling that they are related to other people as well. If we can increase those things, then we can help them to move along this continuum from extrinsic regulation at the start, when they simply do things in response to rewards and punishments. So they might say, for example, I try to learn well because I get into trouble if I don't. There may be a punishment. Or I try to learn well because I get a reward if I do. I'll get a lot of points, for example. That's extrinsic regulation. But then sometimes, of course, this kind of extrinsic regulation becomes to sort of move inwards. It starts to be part of their own feelings. I'll feel really bad about myself if I don't learn well. So they're doing it now because of feelings inside them, not really intrinsic yet, because it's just a sort of feeling of guilt that might come. Introjected regulation, that is called it within the theory. But then they get more and more identified with the reasons for learning. They agree with them much more. So they might say, I try to learn well, or I try to learn the language well because it's important for me to try. So they are now identifying with the need to learn the language, but still not completely free of doing it for them because they want to do it, because they enjoy it. And that will be the fourth stage, intrinsic regulation. I try to learn the language well because I enjoy learning the language, or because I want to get more knowledge, etc. So this movement from extrinsic through introjected, through identified to intrinsic regulation is one of the basic processes going on in learning. And we as teachers should try to find ways of taking learners beyond extrinsic, where they only learn if they get a reward or a sweet, to intrinsic regulation, where they begin to enjoy it. So learning might begin with because they only learn because they'll get a sweet, but gradually, if we can organize the learning properly, they will start to see that they can enjoy it, and gradually they will enjoy it as well. And as I said, different kinds of motivation can exist together, and so they'll move again toward in the direction of intrinsic motivation for learning, and that is more self-sufficient. So in the intrinsic regulation, there's more inside them and is more durable than simply being controlled by external forces, as with extrinsic regulation. So, okay, that's one way then in which motivation in the classroom can be looked at. And we can organize our teaching to try to move along this continuum from extrinsic to intrinsic regulation as well. So that's one perspective on learning in the classroom. Now here's another perspective. Now it's connected very much. Well, the person who has discussed it ever such a lot is Zoltan Dornay, who is, and there's an article there, 2019. I put it in the reading list on the final slide, and you can actually get hold of it if you click that link, or if you simply go through Google or somewhere, you can actually get hold of this article by Dornay and Muir. Sorry, he's written several articles which say the same sort of thing. But motivational teaching practice, specifically teaching in ways which attempt to support motivation. So motivational teaching practice then is the basic concept. So what have we got there? There are four, within this framework of Dornay, there are four particular aspects to it. And I've put them there in that diagram, and I'll look at them in greater detail in a moment. First of all, we have to create basic motivation conditions. We have to generate initial motivation to learn. Then once the motivation comes, the next circle around, we have to maintain the motivation, keep it from dying out. So we have to maintain it, and we have to also then, at the end of the learning or after the learning, when they look back on what they've done, we have to try to encourage them to self-evaluate what they've done in a positive kind of way. So let's look at those four aspects just a little bit more in detail, but you can read it in that article, which I say is available online. You can read much more about it there. So if we look at their creating motivational conditions. So what can the teacher do? First of all, the teacher's behavior. The teacher can behave in ways which are culturally and educationally appropriate. So if he or she is teaching in another country, like in China or Hong Kong or wherever, then certain ways in which the teacher behaves are more acceptable than in, for example, USA or Britain. And so in order to create a relationship and a good conditions, then the teacher needs to be aware of that. Second one, needs to create a pleasant and supportive atmosphere, because learning, you might be aware of the theory of Stephen Krashen, who says that we have an affective filter, And when we're in a situation where we're not happy, there's a kind of filter that we stop learning because the input does not get through our filter and we do not really learn properly. So we want to create a supportive atmosphere, and it really makes intuitive sense as well, that when we have a creative, supportive atmosphere, students are going to be much happier together. Now, at the same time, of course, generally students need to feel some kind of some kind of goal as well. So some kind of not stress exactly, but some kind of sense of challenge, a sense of challenge as well. So how to reconcile this need for a supportive atmosphere with this need to give a challenge is one of the things which personally in my teaching, I found that one of the most difficult things to create the balance, to be supportive, but at the same time challenging, because a lot of it will vary with each individual learner. So what to some learners is challenging and makes them learn better, may for another one be unpleasant and reduce their motivation because it makes them feel less happy. So these are not easy things to do. It's where the teacher's empathy, the teacher's ability to step inside the student's shoes and gauge how everything will be interpreted is so very important. So the fourth one, to encourage a cohesive learner group. I've only selected some of the aspects which are talked about, but encouraging a cohesive learner group, so that the learners seem to belong together as a group, supporting each other. And the fifth one, which I think is very, very important as well, creating a sense that learners and teacher together are one learning community. So not that we've got the teacher on one side and we've got the learners on the other side, and they're sort of two sides of the situation, but that they are together so that we can create all kinds of situations where the learners explore things and the teachers explore things. And of course, a lot will depend on the teacher's behavior, trying to express the idea that he or she is an equal person and that he or she is learning together with the others. So one of the reasons why I showed you some metaphors for learning that my students gave me. One of the reasons why why this particular course, I always start it with that activity, is that in it, it's the learners that come up with the metaphors, the learners have all the input, and right at the very start, I'm hoping that they will get the sense that they are equal members of a learning community where they can all learn together. And in this particular case, in those metaphors which I've given you, and you can read more of them, it certainly had that sort of effect that it drew upon their independence and their imagination, and the learners were a learning community together with the teacher with me. Okay, so but in general situations as well, to create a learning community, and of course that's one of the principles of project learning, that learners and teachers learn together, and that learners are also experts in things where the teacher is not an expert. It's a truth, it's true, and it's something which we can capitalize on, which we can use in the classroom a lot, so that learners and teachers can be equal members of the community. Okay, so those are then the motivating conditions, the basic motivating conditions. And I haven't exhausted everything. I've just put four ways. You can read about more in that article, and you can also think of far more yourself as well. Then getting them to generating initial motivation, getting them to start learning. First, before I start learning any language, for example, not that I've learned many, but before I do, I have to have some kind of initial motivation just to get me involved in it, just to get me involved in a language. So some of these then, the second one, perhaps the second one, second bullet point I should have put first. Increase the learner's perceptions of a purpose. Make them realize why there's a purpose in the learning, or create their own purpose in learning. And second one as well, support positive attitudes. Attitudes towards learning, attitudes towards the language. If it's a language connected with a particular community of speakers, where they will go to this community, support positive attitudes towards that community as well. All of these things to generate initial motivation to learn. And then going back now to the first bullet point, make the learning materials themselves as relevant and motivating as possible, as relevant to their perceptions of purpose, as relevant to what they want to do with the language, as relevant to their situation as possible. So this is why the notion of personalization in language learning, relating the learning to the personal identity of the learners, where they live, who they are, getting them to express their own character, their own personality. All of these things are part of making the learning material relevant and motivating to the learners, so that initial motivation comes about, and then and they have an increased expectancy of success, feeling that they can succeed. Now these spill over not only into an initial motivation, but also into this next one, maintaining the motivation. So a lot of these factors like that, supporting positive attitudes and expectancy of success, they also are part of maintaining motivation. We always divide these things, we put them into little boxes in order to make it easier to talk about them, but they're all there together. So maintaining the motivation, maybe the most obvious one, making the learning stimulating and enjoyable, and presenting the tasks in a motivating kind of way. So, and protecting the learner's self-esteem and increasing their self-confidence, facilitating their sense of autonomy, their sense of independence, the fact that they see themselves as independent learners and have autonomy, encouraging cooperation among learners. Now you can relate those bullet points directly to what I said about self-determination theory before I started on this particular little section. So self-determination theory, the three basic conditions for becoming intrinsic learners, according to that theory, were that they should feel autonomy, facilitating their sense of autonomy. The second one, that they should feel competence, so that's protect their learners' self-esteem and their self-confidence, so that they feel competent to do things, and encouraging cooperation amongst learners. That's the third condition under SDT, encouraging cooperation among learners and trying to make the whole thing into a learning community. Okay, so that's maintaining the motivation then. And then after the learning, it's quite important now then, to what does the learner attribute success? Or, of course, to what does the learner attribute failure? So attribution is seen as a very important aspect of motivation. Because if you attribute success just to pure good luck, then that doesn't mean that you have confidence that you can do the same again. Whereas if you contribute failure to your own shortcomings, then that can have a very debilitating effect on whether you try to learn again. But if you can get them to attribute success to things which they have done themselves well, then that's more likely to carry forward into motivating them for more learning. Or if you can encourage them to see failure as being something which they can put right. Maybe they had a bad day, maybe they were unlucky or what have you, then again, there's more chance that they will be, that it will not affect their future learning, that they will want to carry on learning. Because remember, we're now talking about the future, carrying it forwards into future learning, which is important. And providing motivating feedback, giving the kind of feedback which enables them to build on things, pointing out things which they can do, which they can do better, alternative things which they could do, giving new avenues of success, giving new avenues that they could explore. For example, if they've been doing a project, giving the kind of feedback which will motivate them to carry on doing it. Now, these are all thought of aspects of the third bullet point, which is increasing the learner's satisfaction. So remember, all of these things are connected. So increasing the learner's satisfaction, that's all part of making a comfortable learning situation where learners are satisfied. So in this evaluation of their learning, we can increase their satisfaction in this sort of way. And then offering rewards or grades in a motivating manner. So well, how we offer rewards and grades, well, that varies a lot. I'm never sure on that myself, actually, really. But offering rewards and grades in a motivating manner so that students realize what they've done to deserve them. But also, if they've done, the trouble is with rewards and grades is that they're wonderful for the people who've done well, but they're not so wonderful for the people who do wrong, do bad. So personally, whenever I can, I avoid giving rewards and grades, but you need to give some, but it's nice to give some kind of reward in the sense of feeling that third bullet point, increasing learners' satisfaction with what they've done so that they will do more in the future. So anyway, encouraging positive self-evaluation then, all part of this motivational teaching practice. And you can read more about it, as I said, in that article. I'm now going to briefly look at a third perspective, which is looking at it more now from aspects of the classroom which the teacher can control. And I'm taking here an article from a little, it's a small booklet actually. Again, I put a reference on the final slide, and you can access it online. It's available as a booklet published by TESOL America or something like that. But it's also, you can also get it in another version where it does not rely upon you being able to sort of buy it, actually buy it and get it delivered. So you can get this thing about the 5 T's of motivation. You can get it in more than one form. Okay, well, what are they then? What are they? First of all, the first T at the middle is the teacher, the teacher's behavior. How can that affect? This will encompass a lot of things that we've looked at. Teacher's behavior, how the teacher deals with people, how the teacher gives praise, how the teacher behaves. These are all aspects, and we're looking at it all now from a different perspective. What can the teacher do to control it? So I've actually used this with students on training course, and I've got them under each of these little circles, which you'll see another 4 in a minute. I get them to give what commandments. So what should the teacher do in order to increase the motivation? Like be kind, be warm, etc. Be fair, be well organized. Be such a lot of virtues actually that it makes me frightened sometimes, and no teacher can have all of these things, but they're all things that which we can aim for in any case. So we've got the teacher there. Then we've got the teaching method. How can we adapt the teaching method to how the learners can learn to their purposes, to their learning, to their styles of learning, to what they like to do, and also in general to make it more interesting, so that they have a lot of interesting activities. So this can overlap with building in a lot of cooperation, for example, cooperative learning, making the classroom into a learning community, which in my opinion is the big key to motivation, really, for the classroom to be a learning community, but a positive learning community, not one where nobody cares, but a learning community where everybody is working towards a purpose. So we've got a teaching method, we've got a text, the kinds of things that the students learn or read or listen to. The materials themselves should be interesting to them in relation to their own interests and so on. And also, of course, should be the right level of difficulty. All these things we know about, the right level of difficulty, the right sort of building, the right relationship to the students' culture, as well as the culture of the language which they are learning, if they are learning the language of a specific culture there, and so on. Or if it's international language, of course, it might be relevant to learning in a lot of different countries. So you might have texts which deal with different life in all sorts of different cultures. And so language learning can be a vehicle for getting a lot of cross-cultural awareness into students. We've got tasks. What about doing the task? So what tasks do we set them? The right level of task, interesting tasks, engaging tasks. This notion of engagement is one which people often highlight these days as being very important. It's not just enough to give students a task. It has to be a task which engages the learner. And once they are engaged, engagement is really the same as motivation almost. In the concept, in the relationship to a task, engagement is also motivation. And when they're engaged, they are cognitively engaged. They can be engaged in several ways. Behaviorally engaged, and behave just simply by being there and doing things. Socially engaged with other students. Cognitively engaged, thinking about things, working things out. So all sorts of engagement in relation to the task, which can increase their motivation. And finally, test. When they do tests, what sorts of tests do we do? Not the kinds of tests we hope, which shows that everybody is no good. So we hope it should be assessment for learning, where they can actually learn things from the test and go on and do better. You probably know, you probably come across the phrases assessment of learning, where you just test what they know, and if they don't know it, then they've failed. Sorry. Or assessment for learning, where you test in order to move on from there, in order to find out aspects which they don't know so well, which they can then learn better. Also to find out their strengths as well. So the whole focus moving onto strengths as well there. So that is also really part of motivational teaching practice as well. And so those different perspectives together work together to help the motivation of the students. And we hope that the teacher in the middle there, is going to be the, what should we say, the orchestra. No, not the leader. It's going to be the coordinator of all of these things, so that all of these things work together to create a motivating experience for the learners as well. So, okay, I think I've said enough now. And so here's the final. It was there and then it went again. As I say, the final slide has got, there we are. The final slide has got references where you can read the one by Dornay, the motivated classroom, which we talked about, the one by Renandia, the five T's. That little diagram actually is not in the book, but the aspects are the five aspects, the five T's. And then if you want to learn more about self-determination, there's a whole website about self-determination theory. Unless you want to go into it seriously, quite a lot to read there. Okay, but these three here are much sort of more focused on second language learning as such. So having said that, then, thank you very much indeed for being there. And that's it. So please
thank you so very much, Professor Bill, for such an insightful talk. And now the floor is open for questions and answers. If you have any questions, so you can ask Professor Bill, you can write them in the chat. So I have a question, it's from Amna Ishaq, she's from Lahore, Pakistan. Why second language acquisition is easy in school children than adults?
Sorry, I'm sorry, my loudspeaker is not very good.
Okay, so Amna Ishaq asked that why second language acquisition is easy in school children than adults.
Oh, easier for school children than adults.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Is it always? I don't think it's true that the second language learning is always easier for children than for adults. I don't think it's true. Actually, is there evidence of that? Because you get a lot of adults who are very successful at learning. Maybe children, because children are they have more motivation in the sense that they are in a school setting. They're more or less compelled to learn. So I remember at school, I did not have very much choice really, and it's this interface between this interface between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. If people have extrinsic motivation, then very often they experience things, and then they begin to like it. I remember that a lot. Really, that a lot of things that I never would have done if I had not been more or less forced to do it, so extrinsically motivated to do it. But gradually, I came to realize that it was good. And that of course, all comes down to whether the teacher is able to present it all in a motivating kind of way. So, but basically, right. I don't know what evidence. I don't know what evidence there is.
Well, Basim Kabache from Algeria, he asked that how can we increase motivation in communicative language teaching our student-centered classrooms?
As soon as they enter the classroom. Sorry, I don't quite understand.
Yes. So he asked that how can we increase motivation in CLT, our student-centered classroom?
Oh, as soon as we enter.
No, CLT.
Huh?
CLT.
CIT.
In CL, how can you use motivation in CLT and communicative language teaching?
Oh, I think, well, CLT, I think is CLT can draw upon all of these things, I think. Because it can relate the language to communicating with it, so people can see the purpose that they've got. That's one of the main claims made for CLT, that it enables students to see the purpose of why they're learning the language. And CLT can be there can be a lot of activities in CLT where the learners are working in groups together. So you have this sort of community kind of atmosphere there. And you have a lot of, and CLT gives a lot of importance to sort of breaking down barriers between the teacher and the students. In the broader version of CLT, then you know, there have been different versions of CLT. There was one version where everything was kind of set down. What you should do, you should teach that way, and you should teach this way, and so on. But then gradually, that has become much more relaxed, and currently the framework for CLT is much freer. That the students can learn on everything, which the teachers can draw on everything, which is going to make the learning agreeable, etc. But actually, on this one, I haven't put it in the reading list, but you can get a useful little booklet online written by Jack Richards, Richard J.C. Jack Richards, and it's called Communicative Language Teaching Today. And it's a little booklet, which I don't know where he first published it, but now it's available online from Cambridge University Press as a little booklet, and he sets out the different sorts of versions, or some of them, of communicative language teaching. And in its modern version, then it can draw on all of these things which support learning, and it sort of opposes any sort of desire to impose ways of teaching upon teachers. Actually, communicative language.
I see.
Yeah.
I see another question from Estrina, and she in the current situation with a world that is affected by the pandemic, how does a teacher keep constant monitoring of the student level of motivation? There is so much we could do behind the screen. So, what would be the best method?
Oh, in the pandemic situation, I wish I knew the answer to that. It's a very difficult one, isn't it? It's a very difficult one. But I think really all of these things, like setting up a supportive atmosphere and so on, and sort of breaking down all the kinds of barriers between people, and also trying to make as good use as you can of things like breakout rooms, so that you can at least go around the breakout rooms. I find the breakout rooms are wonderful, but a little bit frustrating, because in the time available, you can get round to so few. And by the time you've exited one breakout room and then gone into another one, 3 minutes have gone. And so you can't go around many. But I think psychologically, you going from one breakout room to the next gives them the feeling that you are there with them. In fact, one of the students in the feedback that they have to give afterwards mentioned that they appreciated the fact that I went around the breakout rooms. And to be honest, it was one of the hardest bits of work I had to do, going from one to the other, because you know yourself, don't you? You have to exit one breakout room, then a little pause where you then have to enter another breakout room. And at first I had sort of frightening experiences where I would sort of totally lose track of everybody. And I'd have this feeling of a black room where I could not find anybody. But that was teacher motivation. But I think that is important as well. And also, I have a sort of basic sort of principle, a basic philosophy really, that many people think it's over sentimental, that you should make students feel that they are loved. If you can make the students feel that you love them, that they are loved. Actually, I saw an interesting thing on Facebook about love. What love can mean such a lot of different things. From Romeo and Juliet type of love to I love chicken pieces, things like that. But in a broader sense, that students like to feel that they are loved, and if you can sort of transmit a kind of feeling to them, it's online, that you care about them, that you love them in the broadest sense, I think that's a very important thing. But obviously, the little things like monitoring what they're doing. I'm a little bit skeptical about all this monitoring in any case, to be honest, because when you look at people working, you don't know what they're doing, you don't know what they're thinking. You know, the real sources of motivation and learning are much deeper than whether you simply see people doing things. But that's what I think anyway, giving them this feeling that they are loved online.
So another question from Ben Daoud, he said, how can we motivate the demotivated learners? You can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. How could teachers make this adage positively motivating for learners and for themselves?
Yeah, very important question. A very good question for a very sad situation, but it's true. I mean, they've been demotivated. I guess a first stage might be for trying to find out what were the things that demotivated them. Now, sometimes for a whole class, they've been through demotivating experiences as a whole class, that they had a bad teacher, they had bad experiences, they had difficult examinations, and then of course you just need to try to sort of put some of these things right and show them you're a more understanding teacher and so on, and that even though they failed one set of exams, there are many things they can do very well, etc. Or sometimes the demotivation is just one individual students where you can talk to them and again show them things they can do. But I think basically it's demotivation is sort of the other end from motivation, really. So really it's sort of trying to build on all of these other things like motivational teaching practice, and I'm a big believer in self-determination theory, actually. You know, getting them to feel that they can do things that there where they couldn't, and so gradually building on all of these aspects, so that you can try to sort of gradually rehabilitate. I mean, rehabilitate is the wrong word, because no. I must try to take back that word, because it suggests that there's something wrong. But there's weak motivation. So if you can build on, find all sorts of little things which can strengthen it, like when you try to sort of increase your fitness and things like that. But I think all of these things, like in motivational teaching practice, and I think all of the things under teaching for motivation, I think those are all factors where we can build upon those aspects. Actually, it's a good point, actually, that we can also build on all of these things in order to decrease demotivation, as well as increase motivation, to decrease demotivation, so that they begin to take off again. But it's such
a great idea.
Yeah.
Yep. So Rita, there's a question from Rita. She is asking for a book for teachers with ideas and how to motivate.
Oh, a book with ideas on how to motivate. Well, there is a book by Jill Hadfield, Hadfield, Jill Hadfield. She has also done some webinars, and she might have talked about this, I don't know. And it's called, and she writes about motivation, but I have to confess that I've not yet had a chance to read it. But otherwise, I don't know. I don't know a single book. I don't know one single book which is about motivation. I think that at the teaching practice level, I think as a topic, I don't think it's very often being treated systematically. You know, you find little bits in ever so a lot of books about how to make teaching more interesting, interesting, so, which are all relevant, I know, but I don't know a book, I'm afraid, but specifically about how to motivate, about motivation. I'm sorry, I'll look out for it now. Maybe that one, Jill Hadfield. That's her first name, Jill Hadfield, and it's got motivation in the title, but I have not had a chance to read it yet.
Another question from Amir, and he asks, how can we rightly identify and assess students' type as well as level of motivation? Also, how often would it be appropriate to do within a course? How can we rightly identify and assess students' type as well as level of motivation?
How can we assess their level of motivation? I don't think we can really assess it. We can only assess it, I think, through how engaged they are in class. I don't think there's an easy way to assess motivation. I have to think more about that. I mean, there might be some. I mean, there might be some kind of way of doing a survey or a questionnaire, maybe. But I think above all, though, it's observing them and seeing how engaged they are in the different activities. And of course, I mean, there are all kinds of. I mean, it's easy to give very easy to give questionnaires about how motivated are you and things like that. But we want something more sort of rich, really. And I don't think. I'm sorry, yeah. Motivation is a very rich topic, actually, but there's a lot of things about motivation which still need to be properly understood and explored. If they could be explored better, well, language learning everywhere would be so much more successful, because really, I think motivation. I was a long time in Europe, and I've been a long time in Hong Kong, and in all of these places in secondary schools, motivation has been the kind of major problem that has handicapped the learning that goes on. So
we have a question from Noreen. She asked that it means that teachers have to learn motivation theories. How do you propose that can be done when teachers are generally not motivated to learn anything new?
Teachers are not motivated. Well, that's another.
She asked that, from your talk, it means she assumes that teacher, learning these theories of motivation is important. So how do you propose that can be done when teachers are generally not motivated?
Yeah. I don't know whether the theories are so important. I mean, actually, if you look back at the slides and there, well, there is theory. There's a theory of motivational teaching practice, but really the actual things there are actually quite straightforward actions. There, things like creating a coherent group. I would not describe that as but it's a strategy which comes from a theory. But like the 5 T's of teaching. The T's, the very final slide I put on. That's a very simple theory, really. It's just 5 letters, 5 times the letter T. But most of it is actually coming down to specific strategies which the teacher can use, and there's not necessarily everything all at once, all together. But starting in one place, and then likewise with the motivational teaching practice, you can start on one aspect, then gradually build up. I don't think it's heavy theory, to be honest. It's more. Most of it comes down to practical strategies when you look at it, and I believe in the theory as being very useful for making sense of things and seeing connections, but I don't see the theory itself as being, when it comes to actually working out strategies for teaching, it's the strategies, the concrete strategies that are most important rather than theory.
Yes, question from Lysian, and she's from Madagascar, and she asked, which is stronger, inner motivation or extrinsic motivation, external?
Extrinsic or intrinsic?
Yep. Which one is stronger?
Well, Well, you know, for a long time, the theory was that intrinsic motivation is always stronger. That came partly because the first bits of research were done in Canada. And there it nearly was students who were intrinsically motivated learned much better. But since then, they've done a lot more studies, and they found out that very often students who are extrinsically motivated are actually, at least while the teaching is going on, might be more strongly motivated because they have a kind of external motivation to learn, and that pushes them. So I don't think there's an answer to that, but it varies with the person, and also remember that you can have both together. That, well, you know, I mean, they're not opposites in any case. You know, one comes from inside, one comes from outside. Okay, but in general, all the time that we're living, there are forces that are inside us and forces that are outside us. And I think generally, intrinsic motivation generally is more durable. I think a lot of this is my understanding of it. That intrinsic motivation is more likely to carry you through difficult times, whereas extrinsic motivation, as soon as you get your examination, or as soon as you get your job, or as soon as you find that you do not get any reward, that motivation might vanish completely. That's my reading of the
Great.
It's anyway.
So maybe this is the last. Yeah, maybe this is the last question. Ikra Shah asked that what kind of development you want to see in a teacher?
What kind of development? I think the most important development of the teacher is to become autonomous, using this word autonomous, actually, that the teacher puts together his or her way of teaching, getting whatever information he or she can have about what people have learned in theory or learned in practice, but not believing in all theory, but not rejecting all theory either, but trying to put it all together in an individual kind of way, that the teacher develops his or her own teaching style based on an understanding of the issues, but never based upon what other people tell him or her to do. Now, I know that's easier said than done, because in many systems, there are sort of people who earn their money by telling others what to do. There, but you know, ideally, the teacher remains his own person or her own person, and explores the issues, but then puts together his or her own teaching approach, bearing in mind what the students need all the time. That sounds very general, but I can't think of anything more concrete, actually. Well, I can think of more concrete things, but they go on forever.
That's great. Wonderful. So thank you so very much, Bill. Any final words or message for our audience, our community of practice?
Oh, I should have thought of that. These final words are important, aren't they? I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I actually giving as we all know now, teaching online or doing things online is a very funny kind of situation, because we can't see any kind of feedback. But I was able to sort of feel the kind of feedback, also from your questions, and also from Amanullah, your very, very supportive kind of role in it. You know, that I've enjoyed it. I've liked it. It's been a sort of further exploration, learning. I think, as a teacher, you said, what should a teacher do? I think a teacher should always be a learner, has to be a learner. And I have learned a lot. I have learned ever so lot through teaching online, and I've learned a lot through doing this particular webinar. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so very much, Professor. You did a great job. And for this webinar, let me tell you, we had people from, across 6 continents. We didn't have anyone from Antarctica, but, we had from Australia, from Asia, from Africa, from, North and South America, Europe, of course. So, such a wider audience present in this webinar. We thank every one of you for your attendance, and and that's possible because of this pandemic and online meetings that we are, getting to know and interact with such a wider audience.
Thank you very much. Just one final word from me as well. I think this particular institution, this particular organization is a wonderful one, giving people access to, to new ideas and to new ideas and old ideas, and giving people an opportunity to think about it wherever they are living. I think it's wonderful. So I want to congratulate you and whoever else is sort of working with you for doing this. I think it's doing a great job, not only in these COVID-19 times, but also in other times as well. It's something quite unique, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This coming from you, means a lot.
Because thank you very much. Anyway, thank you very much as well for the invitation.
Thanks very much, Professor Bill. It was enlightening. It was so insightful, and certainly a privilege to have you such a speaker, and with a lot of expertise. So I think this particular webinar is going to serve as a reference for future generation as well. It will be available on Teacher Development Webinars YouTube channel, archived there. So if anyone is able, wants to share with your colleagues, so you can do that from Teacher Development Webinars YouTube channel. So for our future webinars, you can always look for our social media channels. We are available on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, of course, and this recording will be available on Teacher Development Webinars YouTube channel. If you want the certificate for this particular session, so there is some 300 rupees, Pakistani rupees, which is less than $2, and some $5 for, which are international audience. So for the payment details, you can email us at info.tdwebinars@gmail.com, and we appreciate your presence. Thanks for being with us today. Thank you, Professor Bill, and thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.